First off, thank you for having me here, and Gary. And Bob, as you and I discussed, what I had planned to do, if it was okay with you, was just to highlight the importance of national security, was to take a few minutes and actually revisit September 11th, 2001, what the agency faced for the first time in its 50-year existence on that day, how the agency, in some cases, did not rise to the occasion, in other cases, really rose to the occasion. And everything I want to talk about is from the Frank Hatfield perspective, does not represent the position of the agency, has not been cleared by anyone, but it's simply my opinion of what I observed and what I thought and what I felt that day, if that works for you. And then we'll transition into a chat about the Domestic Events Network, of which Gary is the manager. So does that okay with you?
Right, that's perfect. I couldn't think of a better way to open up this segment than to have that perspective. So thank you very much for being willing to do that. Yes, sir, it's fine with us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob. First off, during that time period, on September 11th, 2001, I was the Air Traffic Division Manager of Eastern Region, Eastern 500, back in the good old days when we had 500s. And my office was at Kennedy Airport in New York City. So it was an early morning, obviously, beautiful day. I think it was 64 degrees, bluebirds out there, not a cloud in the sky. And on that particular day, I think that the United States of America, for the first time in its homeland, went to war with Al-Qaeda and the terrorists, and the first soldiers in the United States that went to battle were our nation's air traffic controllers. Some of you out there may have been involved that day as controllers. Some of you may have been soups. Some of you may have been in a regional office on that day. Some of you might not even have been in the FAA. But nonetheless, you all were touched by what happened that day. And for those of you that were there, you are truly all, each and every one of you, heroes in my eyes. And I mean that sincerely. So I wanted to taxi through what I knew and what I didn't know that day, a little bit of what's changed and what hasn't changed. Put your pencils down. This is the story. There's not going to be any test afterwards. It's just me talking and telling you some things. So on that morning, and I jotted some notes down. I've been asked to talk about it a lot. I've never talked about it in any kind of detail before. You're the first. I dodged the 9/11 Commission. When they came after me, I was already in Iraq. So they tried to subpoena me, and our lawyers convinced them it was more important I'd be in Iraq. So I never talked to the 9/11 Commission, which is a fact I'm sort of kind of proud of. I actually dodged that whole process. But what I didn't know, on that morning, like shortly before dawn, two guys with Middle Eastern complexions approached a U.S. Airways desk in Portland, Maine. The ticket agent was a guy named Michael Tuay. Michael Tuay looked at the guys standing there and asked them the standard questions. Does anybody besides you put anything in your bags? Have your bags been with you? And one of the two guys got really angry and just stared at him. And the quote from this guy, Michael, who was the ticket agent at US Air in Portland, was, "This guy gave me the most hateful look, the most angry look on his face. I thought, if this doesn't look like an Arab terrorist, then nobody does." Those words crossed this guy's mind. Immediately after he thought that, he said he gave himself a mental slap in the face and said, "You're just being bigoted and biased." And he processed their two ridiculous tickets, $2,500 each, from Portland to LA, and passed them on through. Something's changed since then, and I'm going to point out things that change as I go along. Right now, if a ticket agent has any kind of hinky feeling whatsoever about anybody, they don't process them through. TSA has BDOs, which are body detection observers. They look at the language, the body language. These ticket agents have access to them. They can call them over. That person would never get through today. But they did on September 11th. So as they get through, it's 2 minutes from the counter to the security. They show up as security. They're on camera. Somewhere in those 2 minutes, they've removed their jackets, their sport jackets. They've taken off their neckties and left them somewhere in that 2-minute time. So somewhere around the same time, along the East Coast, there were 17 other terrorists that were in the process of making their way through the ticket process, through screening. 3 of those 17, like Mohammed Atta, who was one of the 2 that went through in Portland, had pilot training. So a total of 4 with pilot training. The rest of the 19 were simply muscle to pull off what they were going to pull off that day. For weeks, they've been taking surveillance flights across the country, looking at when does the seatbelt sign go on, come off? When does the cockpit door get sealed? When do the flight attendants make their rounds? All of those things. They were taking multiple surveillance flights across the country. Once again, what's changed? That wouldn't happen today. Flight crews are trained to be looking at people that are out there doing what may be surveillance on aircraft. Many of you out there may have reported or know somebody that did report one of those from the DEN, the Domestic Events Network. This is not infrequent. Quite often we'll get a call from an aircraft that's in the sky saying, we have 3 suspicious individuals in the back of it. They keep getting up, going to the bathroom, checking the overhead, changing seats. Flight crews are trained to look for that today, so hopefully that's not going to happen. 6:45 in the morning, none of this is known to us. 2 teams of 5 check in at Boston Logan. 2 teams, 5 people each, total of 10. One of them got on American 11 from Boston Logan to LA. Mohammed Atta was on that aircraft. He was the leader of the 19. 5 additional people got on United 175, which was also going to LA out of Boston. 7:24 at Newark, 4 board United 93, which is going Newark to San Francisco. A few minutes later at 7:29 at Dulles Airport in Virginia, 5 men board American 77 Dulles to LA. One of the people going through checkpoint screening does not have an ID and cannot even speak English. A couple of the guys around him that did speak English that were on that team talked to the security people. He was let through. That's changed. What are the odds of somebody going through screening today with no identification, not even able to speak English, and us clearing them through? So that's a significant change for us. On a side note, I've seen the actual video footage of those being screened, and in the back right pocket on one of them, there's a knife in his back pocket. It's folded. The blade is less than 4 inches long. The screener completely overlooked it, and that's back in the days when you could carry a knife with a less than 4-inch blade, and that was clearly in his pocket. Had they even caught it, he would have been able to walk through with it, but he did have that in his pocket. At 8 a.m., all 19 of the hijackers have passed through screening, and they've now boarded their aircraft. At 8:14, out of Boston, American 11 and 175 depart Boston for LA. It's now 8:14 in the morning. After takeoff, the hijackers on American 11 stab 2 crew members, 1 passenger, and take over the cockpit. At the same time, they spray mace in the front of the aircraft to keep all of the passengers sealed in the back of American 11. We know this because the flight attendant was telling us about it. 2 things have changed there. 1, the cockpits have been hardened. They have procedures for pilots to leave. That's not going to happen again. You're not getting in the cockpit. And secondly, anybody that thinks they can get a can of mace through TSA, my wife can't even get a tube of mace through TSA. That's not going to happen again. Anyhow, they take over the aircraft somewhere shortly after takeoff when they hit altitude. At 8:21, American Airline 11's transponder is turned off. This is the aircraft with Mohammed Atta at the control. A few minutes later, a Boston air traffic controller hears over his ATC frequency. The transponder's gone off now. That's our first clue in Boston that something's going on. The controller hears, quote, "We have some planes. Just be quiet and you'll be okay. We're returning to the airport." Boston Center immediately treats the primary target as a hijacking and starts moving airplanes out of the way for American 11, the primary target. At 8:27 in the morning, the primary target, American 11, makes a sharp turn to the left to the south. Now, I'm sitting in New York City. I'm in Eastern region. Boston's in New England region. Certainly Boston's talking to New England region, but I'm in Eastern. So to me, it's a beautiful day in New York City. Absolutely no idea that this is going on in Boston, that we possibly have a plane hijacked. At 8:37, Boston picks up the phone and calls Northeast Air Defense Sector. It's EADS now. It used to be called NEADS. That's the military up at Rome, New York. And say they have a hijacked aircraft heading towards New York, and the FAA needs someone to do something like scramble jets or something. That's a change. That wouldn't happen today. Eastern Air Defense, Boston would have put that hijacking 10 minutes later up on the den. Everybody in the country would have known that we had a hijacking occurring in Boston, so there would have been no need to call EADS. The den already has the military on it. At 8:43, United 93 departs Newark. It was late for San Francisco. All 4 aircraft are now in the air, and we still don't know what's going on. Meanwhile, American 11 is descending and flying the Hudson River towards Manhattan. This is the first aircraft that hits the North Tower. At 8:46, 2 F-15 scramble out of Otis Air National Guard. The aircraft's not squawking American 11, so they can't find him. They're in the sky just looking blindly for some airplane. A point I'd like to make here, if the Domestic Events Network had existed then, if they had heard the initial call on the den that a hijacking had occurred, then those airplanes would have been in the sky approximately 13 minutes earlier. 30 seconds after the F-15s launched, the first aircraft, American 11, hits the North Tower of the World Trade Center. That would have been 13 minutes that we could have tried to put the fighters on the first aircraft. Even if they didn't get the first aircraft, I think they certainly would have had a shot at the second aircraft, because quite a bit of time goes by here. Although it seems like minutes, it's quite a bit of time. About that time is when we get a call in Eastern, me and Rick Descharm, my deputy, that an airplane just ran into the World Trade Center. We had no idea what was going on. I mean, it was just, you pick up a phone, beautiful day, you can see Manhattan out the windows of the regional office, and an airplane just ran into it. Quickly, we checked New York TRACON towers. Anybody missing an airplane? The answer was no. We got all our airplanes. We thought for probably 2 to 3 minutes there that what we were dealing with was a general aviation aircraft where the pilot had had a catastrophic mechanical or a heart attack and coming down the Hudson VFR, and it just veered over and ran into the World Trade Center. So there was confusion. Now, I'll come back to that confusion that Rick and I experienced a little later on after I talk a little bit more. But once again, with the den had been in existence, we'd have known exactly what was going on. It's probably the hijacked aircraft. At 8:54, a couple of minutes later, American 77, Dulles to LAX, which has taken off, is in Indianapolis Center, and it goes from Dulles to the West Coast. It's in Indy Centers, and it starts a slow left turn, and this transponder goes off. The controllers at at Indy Center had absolutely no idea what was happening in New York. So the first thing that they thought was that when they started calling it, they can't see it anymore because their radar wasn't configured for the primary. They think they have an aircraft accident where this aircraft has crashed somewhere in the state of Virginia. They immediately start picking up the phone, calling Air Force Search and Rescue, call West Virginia State Police. This aircraft isn't even really in the game at that moment. In the meantime, I picked up the phone and I called Washington headquarters and said, we just had an airplane crash into the World Trade Center. They said, let's start a phone bridge. Dave Knowles was in Washington headquarters at the time. He was the guy on the other end of the phone, left his office, ran to the 10th floor, and set up in the old air traffic conference room, got us on the speaker. So now I'm talking to Dave. As all of this information is flowing in, no one's really connecting all the dots for a minute or two. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. But at this point, you've got 3 centers involved: Boston Center, Washington Center, and you got Indy Center. 3 centers, 3 regions: New England, Eastern, and Great Lakes. And nobody is really talking to each other and pulling all this information together. So at about 9 o'clock, 9:01, New York Center calls EADS and says, Northeast Air Defense, the military, hey, I need some airplanes down here, some fighters. I think I have a similar situation in New York because we just picked up another airplane inbound to New York over New Jersey, a raw primary target, and it's coming in fast, and it's headed right towards Manhattan. Eastern Air Defense said they were busy. with the two fighters looking for American 11, which had already crashed. And they just continued to look for American 11 for the time being. New York TRACON and New York Center were talking, New York Center and Boston Center were talking. That's when all the dots came together and we realized we were under a terrorist attack. The New York TRACON Soups tells New York Center, I don't know who that is, but I mean, these are quotes, the tapes are there to listen to. Says, I don't know who it is, they're descending out of 95 to 9,000, inbound to Manhattan. And the Center Soup says to him, heads up, it looks like we have another one. At 9:03, United 175 hits the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Since nobody knows what aircraft, what airplane hit what building at this time, the fighters are still looking for American 11. By now, we've moved in the eastern region up to the top floor, a crisis command center up there. We know we're dealing with terrorists. And the sad part about it is, or the thing that I take a lot of pride is, and it's unfortunate, is that the New York City controllers, people at Newark Tower, Kennedy Tower, they physically watch this airplane come in. They're physically looking at the North Tower in flames. They see the second airplane fly into the South Tower, and yet not a single person walked out of the towers. Everybody stayed there. That's leadership, it's commitment by the leaders in those buildings. It was commitment by the controllers in those buildings. Many of them had friends, family, neighbors that worked in those two tall buildings, and they didn't walk away. They stayed right there. To the day I die, I will take extreme pride in what they did. By then, we all broke the code. It's now 9:04. At 9:04, Terry Biggio's the manager of Boston Center. He's the manager up there. He shuts down all departures in Boston Center airspace. 9:06, Mike McCormick, who was the manager of New York Center, shuts down, it goes AT0 completely in New York Center airspace. So we're getting airplanes out of there. In my mind, both of those people that day were heroes. Were there any more airplanes besides the ones the four that crashed? You know, I'll let history judge that. There were reports at Kennedy Airport, United 23, Kennedy to LA, that the pilot taxied out, taxied back immediately, tried to offload the airplane in first class. 3 Middle Eastern people refused to get off of the aircraft. When they said we're calling the police, they actually left the airplane to go get the police. When they came back, the 3 guys were gone, never to be seen or heard from again. Was there a 5th airplane? I don't know. There's nobody left to tell you. Anyhow, they're still looking for a crashed airplane over in Indy's airspace. Now, here's what happened. When the airplane stopped squawking, what it did was it completed that left turn, and for 8 minutes, it's coming back towards Washington, D.C., and it did pop back up as a primary, but it popped up 8 minutes later. The Indy controllers, hoping that this airplane is still in the sky, is looking for it on a westbound heading or to the southwest. No one was looking for this airplane to come back to the east. So that was a big search, trying to figure out. I mean, everybody thought it was in the ground, so why would you be looking for American 77 at that point in time? On the meantime, I'm on the phone with headquarters, Dave Knowles, everybody that was gathered there. I'm yelling, hey, we've shut down New York. We need to shut down the system. I don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going on. Shut down the system. At 9:24, the FAA finally figured out American 77 was hijacked, and we tell Eastern Air Defense about it. Not much they can do at that moment in time. At 9:26, the command center issued, and God bless the command center on that day, Ben Sliney, his first day out there as the boss. Ben Sliney, they issued a nationwide ground stop for all aircraft nationwide, no departures. 9:28, the hijackers now take over United 93. Now, in the middle of all this going on, we're getting reports from all these different facilities saying, hey, it's a Northwest flight we're not talking to. We had a big board, and we would throw these airplanes up on a board, and as the facility would come back and say, oh, we're back in comms with that airplane, we'd take it off, and we would just keep pressing on until the board. United 93 went up there, and it never left the board. So we were getting a feeling that 93 was going to be an issue for us. That was the flight that took off from Newark that was going to San Francisco. The controllers in Cleveland Center overheard the actual entry into the cockpit. They could hear the screaming, they could hear the yelling, they could hear the pilot yell, "Mayday." Now I got 4 centers involved into this situation, and no one at the national level is really pulling everyone together into a consolidated response as to what we should be doing. 3 regions, 4 centers, the command center, FAA headquarters, all involved. A few minutes later, Cleveland Center hears the hijacker on United 93 tell the passengers, "This is the pilot, there's a bomb on the aircraft, we're returning to the airport." 9:32, we now know United 93 is hijacked. 9:32, controllers at Dulles Tracon, remember we're looking at 77 now, it's starting screaming eastbound. Controller at Dulles Tracon says they picked up, quote, "a target tracking eastbound at a high rate of speed." Reagan Tower, Dulles Tower pick up that message. They call the Secret Service with some super phones they have, tell the Secret Service we have an airplane inbound. They evacuate the Vice President and the White House at that moment in Washington, D.C. 3 minutes later, United 93, which is now over Ohio, reverses course and starts heading towards Washington. All of these balls are in the air all at one time. At 9:37, 2 minutes later, American 77 crashes into the west side of the Pentagon. Fighters have been launched out of Langley, but they're heading eastbound because there was confusion over where these airplanes were. 9:42, finally, Ben Sliney at the command center, God bless him, implemented what he called SCATANA, the security control of air traffic and navigational aids, and closed U.S. airspace, which requires all aircraft to land immediately, and the airspace goes ATC 0 with the exception of U.S. military. Side note, we told the world when we shut it that day, at that moment, it would be open at noon on the 12th. It didn't actually open back up until the 14th. By this time, an extreme amount of confusion. Who ran into the Pentagon? Because American 77 was crashed somewhere in West Virginia. Where's 93 at? The only aircraft, once again, that was staying on that board was United 93. At 9:57, Air Force One departs Sarasota. Throughout the course of the day, Air Force One would be vectored around. It held over Florida for 40 minutes. It went to Barksdale, and then it went to Offutt, and eventually back to Washington, D.C. God bless the controllers that protected the president, Air Force One, and all the fighters. At 10 o'clock, an aircraft now reports that United 93, which is over Ohio, heading back in, it's over northwest Pennsylvania at this time. It's rocking its wings. In hindsight, we now know that's when the passengers were taking over the cockpit. 1 minute later, United 93 crashed in a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Bob, I know you're getting itchy, but I'm almost towards the end here, and we'll kick it over to the den in a minute. Anyhow, the story is this. When that airplane went down to that field in Shanksville, 103 minutes had passed since the first aircraft was hijacked until the 4th aircraft crashed in that field in Pennsylvania. 2,996 people lost their lives in those 103 minutes. But it wasn't over for the FAA. We still had all these aircraft nationwide we were trying to put onto the ground. We still had aircraft that were being reported north of. You can imagine all across the country telling airplanes to go into airports that they don't have the charts pulled out on, that they don't have the right frequencies. There were a lot of airplanes that were not complying with ATC instructions through no fault of their own or the controllers, that would come up on a bad frequency. So all of these things, until we got everyone landed, it just continued to go on. But that's the key. It was an honest-to-God miracle and a testimony to all of you and the people you represent out there, the controller workforce, the supervisors, management, that by 12:15, we had landed over 4,500 aircraft, and every one of them had landed safely. That was a major feat. By the way, side story, Canada pitched in as well. When we went ATC 0 in the United States, had all these airplanes coming in, Canada implemented something they called Operation Yellow Ribbon, where they shut down all departures in the entire country of Canada. and they focused on recovering all the airplanes that were inbound to the United States. Over the course of the next couple of hours, they recovered 255 aircraft that were destined to the U.S. at 17 different airports. That was about 33,000 U.S. passengers. Those passengers were stranded in Canada. And a lot of them didn't have any money. A lot of them were in towns that didn't have one or two hotels. So a lot of Canadians took these people in and kept them for free in their homes for 4 days until we started getting everybody back on airplanes back to the United States. So that was a testimony to the relationship that we have and our fellow controllers in Canada. Now, after 9/11, Monty Belger, Jane Garvey called me down to headquarters and said, hey, this is like 2 days later. New York was still shut down, the tunnels, the bridges. I talked my way through it, loved doing that. But called me down to D.C. and said, we don't think things went well here, so let's take a look at this and figure out what went bad. Frank, that's your detail. You're on it now. I was on it for a month and a half. During that time period, we made some changes to the Washington Ops Center. We made Washington Ops Center, which is not an air traffic function. We made changes to their procedures, their equipment, some management structure changes where we influenced people to take certain jobs in there. But the one thing I'm most proud of is that we kept that phone call that I made to Washington, D.C. that morning. We kept that line open. That line stayed open constantly. One of the things we realized on 9/11 was if you read the 9/11 testimony, and I've seen the actual statements, the people who were trying to run it at headquarters assumed that air traffic and DOD talked constantly and that they would know everything we knew every minute as it happened throughout this. And that's totally wrong. They weren't on board. They were as confused as we were. That line added that clarity, so we kept it open because we didn't know if there was going to be a second, a third attack by Al-Qaeda in the next month or two. So we kept that line open. That phone has never been hung up, and that's become the Domestic Events Network, and that's the history on that, and that's how long that's been there. So the second part of the detail I had was to come up with standard procedures to pass to all supervisors in the country, all facility managers, all controllers. The next time we have to shut down the NAS, there will be a set of procedures for doing that. Monty Belger, the deputy for Jane Garvey at that time, put another group together that sort of like was a subgroup of me to do those procedures. To Monty Belger's credit, when they gave him a report, and it was an order about that thick, as all orders are, Monty looked at me and we sat down on a Saturday morning and I said, you need to throw that in the trash can, Monty, because the thing that made that work that day, the thing that will make it work in the future, are the supervisors and the air traffic controllers and the FAA that can think out of the box, can do the right thing for the right reason, become a tremendous team in circumstances like this. If you start giving them a checklist, we're going to fail next time. Monty put it back in his lower right drawer, and when he left 2 years later, I think it was still in his lower right drawer. So that's a testimony to you and the legacy that you all are part of here, and the expectation, the challenge. Now, let me go back to where I didn't know anything in New York. I didn't know anything as things were happening because I didn't know what the intel was. There was intel, and intel people will argue with you about this. There was intel out there, now we know, after the fact, that said Al-Qaeda, this crazy guy who was like the Elvis of terrorists, Osama bin Laden, had even said that they wanted to fly airplanes into buildings in New York City and Washington. I'm the air traffic division manager of Eastern Region. Washington and New York belong to me. I have a top secret clearance, and yet somehow I didn't know that. Had I known that morning, would I have put together something in my mind a little bit quicker when the first plane hit the first tower? Maybe. I would like to think I would have changed things. I don't know. But the fact is, we knew nothing, and we were faced with a situation that we actually had to figure out as we went along until we ruled it as terrorism about 6-7 minutes into it. So a lot of government agencies were like that. So after 9/11, a lot of government agencies created what they call fusion centers. And fusion centers is where you take your best and brightest in intel, you take a bunch of alpha operational animals, in our case controllers, and you put them all in a room, make them one organization. The ops folks get all the pure intel, we interpret it, and we act on it after we get the intel. That was the idea the FAA went with also. Only they didn't put the intel in our organization, but they did create that alpha animal, and that's called SysOps Security, and that's the birth of us shortly after 9/11. So SysOps Security, that's who we are, that's where we came from. One of the major components of SysOps Security that you interface with outside the DC area is the Domestic Events Network. As you can see, the things that they ask you to put up there, NORDOs, aircraft not complying with their clearances, things of that nature, any flight anomaly, those are key tells in a future terrorist attack. I have to tell you this, I left intel this morning locked up in a safe in a room at 9 o'clock this morning. This morning, although I can't talk about details, there are 2 purported plots against aviation as of this second in time. This is daily, it's weekly. Anyone who thinks Al-Qaeda has turned their back, and it's more than Al-Qaeda now, there's a lot more groups out there that want a piece of the pie, has turned their back on aviation is sorely mistaken. I mean, the fact that in the last couple of years that we had the underwear bomber on Christmas Day, the fact that we have the printer bombers, the fact that you can open the newspaper and read about Al-Qaeda developing belly bombs, bombs that they can insert inside of animals, inside of people. They're still extremely interested. Washington, D.C., New York, and aviation remain their crown jewels. Anyhow, I challenge you to not forget, never forget, and I appreciate you putting up with me rambling for the last half hour or so. But I do want to kick it over to Gary here as soon as I can. Bob, you're standing up. Did I mess something up?
No, you did great, Frank. I just want to take this opportunity before we went over to Gary to say a couple things, and it's it's hard to imagine what the chaos was that day as you described those events, from New York, and you're pretty much your front row seat as things were evolving around you from Boston through Indianapolis back through Washington Center and all the other points in between, and then how this was pretty much the evolution of what we know today as the Den. But I want to say this is also a rare, if not probably a unique moment in a lot of people's lives to have you share your story with us, to introduce you, Frank Hatfield, to this group of supervisors and to those people that are checking in online, to get a glimpse of what it might have been like and to remember why it is we do the things that we do in this area of Operation Security. So I just wanted to say that before I lost that thought. I am also glad that they let you out of the safe today to come and join us in this forum. I appreciate that very much, and thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for taking the time out of this very busy day, I'm sure, to be with us.
Bob, there's nowhere on earth I would rather be than in front of you folks today. And if I could spend every September 11th like this, just reminding people that this is what it's all about. I can think of nothing more valuable I could do with my life. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And I definitely want to give the lovely and talented Gary Miller here an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what I pay him for.
Thank you, Frank.
Hi, Bob. Everybody, thanks again for having us here. So I think Frank sort of, has outlined exactly how the Domestic Events Network got started, and it's never stopped since 9/11, since that day. You are the front line. You are the group, and your controllers are the ones who are the up close front line ears and eyes of what's going on in the NAS every day from a security perspective. He also outlined a couple things about why we do why we report the things we report, the NORDOs, the change of destinations for commercial carriers. And it's been an evolving process. And as your young supervisors come online, you continue to teach them, we continue to learn as well. We've had some areas where we haven't done as well. The Northwest 253, the underwear bomber, the guy that wanted to blow up his britches over Detroit. We made a couple mistakes there. We had 3 telcons. It's Christmas morning. Frank and I are talking. Once we realized it was another terrorist attack against a commercial entity in the United States, we held 3 telcons that day. We held 3 telcons with the centers and 3 telcons with the airlines. We gave out very specific phraseology to issue for controllers to issue right away, every 15 minutes. And the phraseology, and I paraphrase, was something sort of like, there's been a significant security event aboard a U.S. air carrier. All flight crews should remain extra vigilant. Report any flight anomalies to ATC immediately. And that was Frank and I just sort of talking on what the phraseology should be. So we actually provided that to air traffic. The problem, what we didn't do is we didn't tell the centers to propagate the information down to the TRACONs and then out to the towers. And if you keyed on any of the phrase I said there was a significant security event aboard a U.S. air carrier. So now, of course, what happened in Charlotte and Philadelphia is the U.S. air pilots decided they're not going to push back. Because we said, what's going on with the U.S. air flight? The way we figured that out is Charlotte Approach called up and wanted to know what was going on and why their U.S. air pilots would not push back from the gates. So we learned that. The second thing we learned also is we had these 3 telecoms with the airlines. We never told the major carriers to tell their subsidiary companies, the United Expresses. We also failed to tell FedEx, UPS, so they had no knowledge either. So we learned from that. And then we got better, and we've outlined, we have the procedures in place, and we're sort of working on a GNOT now to try to outline that phraseology for a significant security event, say for instance an unexplained explosion of a commercial carrier, within the NAS somewhere, so that we can get that out to the field and make sure that everybody is aware. But we've had some successes too. We had Thunder Bay. It was a guy that wanted to commit suicide by DOD, so he steals an airplane out of Canada. He probably would have got his wish if he'd have sort of pushed over towards Chicago or St. Louis, but he circumnavigated everything, including a nuclear power plant. So he really wasn't too committed in dying. But he ended up landing on a dirt road. The centers, Minneapolis Center was so on top of this, it was amazing. Chicago Center, Memphis Center, as we're working down, the approach controls coming up online as we got fighters en route, we have tankers coming up. FBI was trying to get a negotiator airborne. All of the air traffic facilities were all focused on this one area, but everybody knew everything that was going on. The Austin event, where the civilian, the GA guy, was mad at the IRS and his ex-wife for taking everything, and he crashed into the IRS building. Austin Approach, Austin Tower, Houston Center, Fort Worth Center, Albuquerque Center, they were all on the den. They heard it all. The military decides they go battle stations across the country. Every single facility that was engaged in that, Oakland Center with a high-speed inbound in the Fresno area, Fort Worth Center with a Delta and an American, an Air Mexico coming into Fort Worth Center, Nordo. Even the company couldn't get them. So one of the things that the Den has done is co-located all of that aviation information. It is air traffic controllers, your membership, your supervisors, OMs, telling headquarters, telling the whole country actually, what's going on from an aviation perspective. And on the Den, this 165 to 175 organizations on there 24 hours a day now, everybody from the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, CDC, FBI, every intel group you can imagine. Everybody is getting that information firsthand. Your laser reports that you get, FBI is the lead for that. Anytime you have a sick passengers on board airplanes or a death on an airplane, CDC is the lead for that. So when your young controllers and stuff, and maybe some of your young supervisors, they don't quite understand why they're doing it, there are other government agencies that are actually the lead for it. We're just sort of the clearinghouse for that information. The Den can also ask for DoD assistance. One of the things that we've realized through the campaign season a year ago, I believe it was, last year, or the year before, I can't remember now, it's all running together. We had some controllers thinking that when the fighters get airborne that they're VFR. They're not VFR. They're IFR from takeoff until the intercept. Certain terms that they use, track intercepted, AFIO, approved fighter intercept operations. Those terms have to be used, and sometimes some controllers, the guys working the boards and ladies working the boards are working great. They're doing everything right, and they're trying to help propagate that intercept and stuff. But we still have to follow the rules. We still have to make sure that the terms that are being used are correct, so that it's not a MARSA situation, so that they invoke the block altitudes 2,000 foot above and below and the 5-mile radius of the actual target. All of that stuff is coming out on some special phones that we have in the Den, and we are telling the facilities what the DoD are going to do. For tactical actions, if any of your supervisors do not know or controllers don't know what a headbutt is or what popping flares means, they need to go take a look at the 7610.4 and just read back on it because it's all outlined in there. But the den is there to help you through that. We're not calling deals. We don't do that. We're there to help the supervisors. We're there to help the OMs. We've helped Minneapolis Center find some airplanes before and other facilities. Any flight anomaly, we had one just last night where an airplane is circling a nuclear power plant. First thing that the TRACON did is pick up the phone, call the den, looking for help. Who is this guy? What's he doing there? We're calling the the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the nuclear power plant, and then we called it directly to the plant to find out who's authorized to be in there. Sporting events are big targets, potential big targets, large gatherings of Americans and stuff. If you have airplanes that want to do political banner towers and that kind of stuff, they're not authorized in the airspace. We'll help you track those guys down. But I think that my point here, and I know we're getting short on time, and we wanted to answer any questions you might have, is it is imperative that you realize how important you are. How important you are to the national security of the United States, specifically in the aviation domain. You know, and your controllers know what looks right, what looks wrong, what sounds right on the frequencies, and what looks wrong, or what you hear that could be suspicious. You know where flights normally go. You know where GAs, your flyways are. You know where your VFR corridors are. If things don't look right, you need to let us know because it could be something bigger than that. Please do not let your young controllers, the ones that are newly to the FAA, newly certified, just take it for granted that this is just an event. You don't need to worry about it. I see this every other day or whatever. Make sure the soups know about it. Make sure that the supervisors are reporting it back up to headquarters so that we can engage if we need to. If we need DoD assistance, we'll bring them. I think that we continue to evolve. I think we will continue to evolve in the future. Hopefully we never have another 9/11, but we need to be prepared. And that's what you do every day, working airplanes and observing what's on and going on in the NAS and at your airports. Bob, that's pretty much all I had. Sort of an ad-lib thing. We don't want to have any structured briefings or anything, especially with Mr. Hatfield sitting right here.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, I think the takeaway from Gary's is that we don't care about safe and efficient. We just care about secure.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. We're not going to call a deal on you. We're there to help you. Thanks, Frank.
Well, first of all, Gary, thank you very much, Gary, for coming on. I got to tell you that last year you were one of the significant superstars at the Kansas City meeting. I don't know if I ever told you that in person, but if I didn't, I apologize for not remembering that. But your presentation last year in Kansas City was a hit, and it's mostly because of the information that you guys deal with and work with all the time that is relevant for the supervisory community out here in the operation. It's stuff that happens all the time, and yet it's also things that don't happen all that often that you need to be able to respond to in a moment's notice. So thank you for not only last year, but thank you for coming on again this year and spending some time with this group. Frank and Gary, you guys are great. One of the things that oftentimes supervisors get involved with, along with everything that you mentioned, are presidential movements and those types of VIP activities, and then the spontaneous TFRs that go along with that. I would ask you to think a little bit at this particular time, if you can share information of lessons learned about what were some things that didn't work so well leading into a TFR, what were some of the things that didn't go so well while a TFR was maybe active, or anything else along those types of lines that could benefit this group that's listening with respect to those types of VIP activities.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Just coming off of the presidential campaign, and our president travels a lot, there's some certain basic things that always occur. Sometimes we have controllers that roll airplanes to a 1200 code inside of a TFR. 1200 codes are never authorized in a presidential TFR for sure. One of the things that I think the biggest factor that could help any facility, specifically the tower and the TRACONs for sure, is when the Air Force One crew comes out and the Secret Service advance team comes out to your facility and says, this is what we're going to do, this is how we want the movement to go, we want to shut this airport down for a ramp freeze or runway sweeps and all that. Negotiate with them. You're not threatening the president, so if you tell them that's not going to work for you, they're not going to shoot you. They're just not going to pull their gun out and say, no, we're going to do it this way. They are open. We have seen successes. New York TRACON did it. Kennedy Tower did it. Las Vegas has done it. Orlando Approach has done it, and Tower. where if your runway configuration is set up where your airport's, the landing runway, you can keep half your airport open and not shutting it down. Southern Cal, Los Angeles is another good example. But my point is you have to negotiate with the Secret Service, negotiate with the Air Force One crew, and you may find that it's more efficient for them to do certain things, and you can come out of your RAM freezes, you reduce the delays, you make the airport more efficient. Once a presidential movement is underway, the worst case scenarios are always the bus tours. They are absolutely horrendous. There's nothing I can say to make those easier. They're just terrible. But for the facilities that are working with fighter caps, always have a supervisor on duty watching what those fighters are doing. Sometimes they get tunnel vision. Those fighters end up having to talk to air traffic in one ear, they're talking to Eastern or Western Air Defense in the other. Plus they're navigating, they are trying to lock the target up, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot of helmet fire, what the DoD calls it. And having controllers understand that those individuals in those cockpits are very, very busy, but clearing out airspace as quickly as you can in a safe manner. You do not have to do things that are unsafe ever. And that's, I think, is the biggest thing that we have learned. But negotiating with the Secret Service when they get there, making sure your controllers know what's authorized in a TFR. No GAs authorized inside the 10-mile ring ever, 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 ever. You can't have the tower launch a GA off from inside the inner ring and no one rolls to a 1200 code inside a 30, ever. Those three things right there in itself, I promise you, will make your visits a lot easier.
All right. Thank you for that, Gary. And unless you guys are pressed for time, we probably can spend about 5 or so minutes for questions. Is that okay with you, Frank and Gary?
Oh, for God's sakes, Bob, yes, let's do it.
All right. Well, we're going to begin here in Fort Worth again, and then we'll go to Seattle. We probably have time for one question at each location. So let me begin in Fort Worth. And who would like to ask a question here from the group here?
It's not so much a question as a thank you to Frank for sharing his firsthand experience and recount of 9/11. For me, it was the first time hearing somebody personally involved with it. Everyone in this room probably could say the same thing, but thank you for sharing your personal recollection, Frank. That's from all of us here in this room. And your actions as well.
All right. Let's go out to our friends in Seattle that are meeting in the Western Service Center and see what they have on their minds.
Greetings, Randy Vincent, Seattle Center. Question for you, and you're talking about the helmet fire and ATC trying to react to what the fighters are doing when they're airborne. Has there been continued discussion, or is it on the plan to institute the Tanner procedures, which we've been testing in Seattle for the last 4 or 5 years, into the 7610.4 to reduce that helmet fire and to make it easier on ATC to be more in the loop of what's going on during intercept?
Well, I can directly talk to a little bit of that. Tanner works very well in some places. I am a big fan of Tanner, and right now we still sort of kind of continue Tanner in the test mode. There are places we just physically can't mandate Tanner. They don't have the controller staffing. They don't have the telephone capability. The workload is too much. I mean, a lot of facilities come up with a lot of reasons why it should not be mandated for their facility. So I think that the success that we're seeing, in particular in the Western region area, Western Service area, I'm sorry, some habits die hard. I think that hopefully, I'm hoping that sort of spreads and becomes infectious going across the country. I realize there are places, some places, it's never going to happen. Would I like to see it spread? Yes. Are we ready to leap out there and throw into the 7610.4 yet? I don't know if it's ready for prime time, but I absolutely love it, and I think it's a great program. And I think you guys are the birthplace of it, so thank you.
Thank you.
Shift over to the East Coast, to our friends in the Atlanta area. What do you got for Frank and Gary?
Bob, this is Jim from New York Center. And on behalf of everybody here in Eastern Service area, everybody in the room, a personal thanks to Frank for that most poignant and heartfelt recollections of the event. on 9/11. Many of us in this room were either present that day or were certainly affected by it in the days after. So thank you for that. And my question goes to Gary. And thank you for mentioning the rolling bus tours and the impact to the system. We had one recently through upstate New York, and I was wondering, does anybody debrief the facilities after on their performance to see if we did the right thing, and how can that information get cascaded down to the frontline managers and also the controllers?
Okay, I'm going to interpret that for Gary. He's having a little ear problem here, but don't anybody rush in a room. We'll be done in just a minute.
We'll be good.
So the question, Gary, is that after the rolling bus tour, such as the one we just had in the Northeast,
Yep.
does anybody like take lessons learned, information, stuff like that, and cascade it down to the lowest levels? Does that sort of capture that?
Thank you.
That's it. That's the question.
No, we have not ever done that, and we should be doing that. And we'll take an action item on doing that because we do have some lessons learned. It is, every one is so unique on these bus tours. They're so complex. There's so many rings, activating, deactivating. There's so many sectors, TRACONs, and centers that are involved. We just have never had the time to go back and do a complete lessons learned and come back to the facilities and say, from your perspective, how was it? And then we could take that information back to the Secret Service, back to the DOD, especially when they're putting up caps and tanker routes and all kinds of craziness. We could take that and try to make the next one better because we'll probably have a couple more before this president leaves office. So we'll take that as an action item. We'll do our very best and see what we can put together.
Gary, you couldn't hear it, but the Soups in Eastern just said that was a ridiculous answer. So.
I probably figured as much. That's me tap dancing to the best of my ability.
We call those bus tours a Stucky Pecan Log Tour. So.
Right. Yeah, they're terrible.
No, they said thank you, Gary.
Yeah, whatever.
Frank, Gary, thank you very much for being part of this. It's been great. You guys are great. We appreciate what you do. I know that your organization is huge. I don't even know how big it is because I think it's classified. I know that you have a lot of important things that you do like we all do, but yours is a very unique contribution to the ATO and to aviation in general. And I want to thank you for your dedication, for your commitment to what you do, and for being with us this morning. So thank you guys very much.
Well, Bob, thank you for the opportunity. To all you Soups out there and your fellow Soups, God bless you for what you do. Probably the toughest job in the FAA. If I had the choice between Soup and COO, I think I'd pick COO because it'd be a lot easier. So God bless you for everything you do every day out there.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Gary.
All right, we're out of here. Bye-bye, guys.